3 weeks after Sarah gave birth, social services appeared at her door with a terrifying accusation. Someone claimed she was starving her newborn son. But Sarah knew exactly who made that call, her own mother, just 48 hours earlier. Diane had walked into her home pretending to help, throwing away formula, judging her exhaustion, and secretly carrying emergency custody papers in her bag. What looked like concern from a grandmother was actually the first move in a cold, calculated plan to take Sarah's baby away forever.
I am Laya, 32, living in Ohio. 3 weeks after my son Leo arrived, a child services investigator showed up. Someone reported I was starving my baby. My stomach churned. Immediately thought back 48 hours to when my mother came over uninvited. She made that call. It was her backup plan. Her main scheme was sitting on my dining table inside her open purse emergency adoption papers signed by my father, claiming I was unfit. Before I reveal how we exposed her fraud in family court, please like and subscribe to Sophia Vengeance if you love karma stories. Drop a comment with your location. Now, let us rewind. I was buried in postpartum fog, my eyes burned, my shoulders ached, and my husband, Evan, had just head off to teach history. I was alone when the doorbell rang. My mother, Barbara, just walked in with cleaning supplies. Her smile was fake, thin, and cold. She claimed she was saving me from my own mess. I followed her, holding Leo. She opened my pantry, tossed my expensive sensitive stomach formula into the trash, and replaced it with a cheap generic brand. I stared at the wasted powder. When I questioned her, she just kept scrubbing, using that patronizing tone she saved for my career. She claimed my freelance design income was too unstable for a mother. I was furious. Evan and I paid off our mortgage years ago, yet she still financed her luxury rides. But I was so exhausted I just bit my tongue and let it slide. I did not know it, but she was baiting me. She wanted a blow-up for her case. She told me to go rest while she mopped. As I walked past the dining room, I saw her oversized tote bag wide open on the table. A thick manila folder stuck out, those dark block letters on the top made my breath stop. It was the kind of random moment that turns into a nightmare. The doorbell chimed again, startling Leo. He patted his back until he settled. In the kitchen, Barbara kept humming, playing the devoted grandma. Through the glass, I saw a pharmacy delivery driver holding her blood pressure medication. I opened the door just a crack to keep the chill out. He needed a signature and identification to release the prescription. I glanced back. The kitchen was quiet. The humming continued. I could have asked Barbara to come get it, but I was just too tired. Her tote bag was sitting right there, zipper wide open. I told the driver to wait a second. I walked to the table, gauging the distance to the kitchen archway. Her bag smelled like expensive floral perfume and peppermint. My fingers brushed past her makeup and landed on the rough edge of that folder. Why did I pull it? Maybe the sheer bulk of it felt wrong for a quick visit. Or maybe some motherly alarm went off. I slid it up just an inch. The bold text hit me like a wall. Petition for emergency guardianship. The words did not register at first. They felt alien. Custody. Emergency. My hand started shaking. I pulled the entire stack out and laid it on the table. Shielding it from the kitchen view, I flipped the cover. It was a sworn affidavit to take my child. My air vanished as I read. It painted me as a violent danger, twisting my normal postpartum struggles into severe manic episodes. It claimed I had violent psychosis. My eyes scanned the cold, clinical lies. One entry said I had a hysterical breakdown last Tuesday. You remembered that, Jay? I had dropped a bottle of breast milk and cried from frustration. Barbara was there, patting my shoulder, pretending to comfort me. She had not been kind, she had been documenting. She turned my tears into evidence of an unfit mother. But the bottom of the second page stopped my heart. It was a psychiatric evaluation from an out of state doctor I had never met, complete with a blue notary seal. I am a professional illustrator. I spend 12 hours a day staring at pixels and typography. My work demands obsessive visual scrutiny. A designer notices the construction of an image. I looked at that blue stamp. The ink did not bleed into the paper correctly. The edges were jagged, and it was blurry in spots. Compression artifacts. I leaned in, ignoring my neck pain. The kerning, the spacing between the letters in the notary name was wrong. The T and R overlapped. A physical stamp is always uniform. This was a Photoshop job. A digital fake. My ribs felt like they had been hit. My parents had not just hired a lawyer. They had forged a state notary seal to bypass a judge. They moved from a petty family feud to felony conspiracy. E flipped the page. My breath catching. I checked for other signatures. There was my mother's loop-filled handwriting, and right below it, on the co-petitioner line, was a second name. Small, neat letters. A signature from every birthday card I ever got. My father, Ken. He even used his favorite blue gel pen. A box was checked in that same blue ink. Birth mother unfit. My quiet, gentle father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, had signed it. The man who bought Leo his first bear 3 weeks ago, sobbing in the waiting room when Evan said we had a healthy boy, had just signed papers to legally steal my son and lock me in a ward. He wasn't helpless. He was a conspirator. The betrayal felt like copper in my mouth. It did burn through my fear, leaving me razor sharp. I couldn't panic. If I screamed now, they would use my reaction as proof of my instability. I pulled out my phone and killed the sound. I held it over the folder, focusing the camera on the forged notary seal, making sure to catch the lack of ink bleed. I snapped photos of the seal, the fake medical claims, and my father's signature. The mop in the kitchen stopped. The humming died. Silence hit hard. I had seconds. I shoved the papers back exactly as they were, tucked the folder into my bag, and felt my knuckles brush something hard at the bottom. A leather book with a brass clasp. I flipped it open, and the true, terrifying scale of their plan finally clicked. My fingers brushed a cold, smooth object beneath the silk lining. It was a thick, navy leather book with a heavy brass clasp. I pulled it out, the spine cracking as he unlatched it. I opened the cover and stopped breathing. A title box featured Lupin script that read Baby First Years. It wasn't my handwriting. The ink was a vivid plum. Those signature loops on the E belonged to my older sister, Olivia. My stomach dropped. Olivia hadn't spoken to me in months. She skipped my shower and ignored my texts. Yet, here was a memory book for my son, filled out in her ink. The first dated entry made my head spin. It was marked September 14th, 2 years from now. I read the words, "My sweet Leo, today you turn 2. We celebrated in the garden with the string quartet you love." I blinked back tears. They were erasing me. Birth mother. Unstable. Poor. They weren't just plotting a kidnapping. They were assassinating my identity to replace it with a lie. They want I gone before Leo could remember my face. My family's logic snapped into focus. Olivia is 30. 4 and hasn't held a job in years. She married a wealthy executive named Marcus, and now her life is all country clubs and interior design. She's built an online following around her infertility struggles, posting tearful videos from her pristine estate about the empty nursery. She treats kids like luxury accessory. Since she couldn't conceive, she decided to buy my child. My mother, Barbara, was the courier. This made sickening sense. Mom worships money and credit limits. She always looked down on my freelance work and treats my husband Evan like a failure because he teaches history instead of practicing corporate law. She calls our home a starter house. To Barbara, giving Leo to Olivia wasn't a crime, it was a rescue mission. She thought she was saving my son from a middle-class life. By handing him over, she gets to be the hero, securing a wealthy heir while punishing the daughter who wouldn't fit her materialistic mold. I kept turning the pages. Every entry was pure delusion. Olivia wrote about private preschools and ski trips to Aspen, all while pitying me as a tragic, fragile figure. My hands went numb. I looked down at Leo. He was sleeping, his chest rising and falling. He had my nose and Evan's chin. He was a piece of my soul. The idea of Olivia pretending she birthed him made me want to scream. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd crumble. The mopping stopped. Barbara was 20 feet away, humming, polishing the floors of the home she planned to destroy. I carefully closed the journal and tucked it back in the bag. I slid the folder in the side pocket, matching the zipper exact where Barbara left it. I stepped away from the table. My legs felt like lead, but my mind was a weapon. I needed Evan and Malene, the cutthroat attorney I met 2 years ago. If they filed that petition tomorrow, a judge would sign the order before lunch. Police would rip Leo from my arms. I had 18 hours to build a defense. I adjusted Leo, forced my breathing to slow, and walked toward the stairs, playing the role of the tired, naive mother. I called out to the kitchen, my voice steady. I told Mom I was heading up to rest. Barbara's voice drifted back, dripping with fake sweetness. I walked up the stairs, my heart pounding. and ducked in the nursery. I locked the door behind me. That click was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I set Leah's crib and pulled out my phone to call Evan. The phone began to ring. I stared at the nursery door, knowing the real war started now. I had to alert my husband and lawyer. Without making a single sound for the woman downstairs, I pressed my back against the wood. The lock clicked with a sharp metallic snap. It felt like safety. Inside, the room was a pastel sanctuary. Outside, a predator was busy scrubbing my kitchen. I clutched my son, Arthur, tight against my chest. My hand shook as I opened my phone. I tapped my husband Mark's name. He taught 11th grade history. He lived in a world of facts, logic, and quiet discipline. He never raised his voice. He graded papers with a green pen because red felt too aggressive. He was my anchor. The phone rang twice. I heard the dull roar of the teacher's lounge, the hum of the vending machines, and distant chatter. Mark answered with his usual warmth. I didn't say hello. I didn't soften the blow. Mark, I breathed. My voice was brittle wire. They are trying to steal Arthur. My mother has forged legal papers in her purse right now. The response wasn't a gasp or question. It was the sudden, violent crash of ceramic against tile. I knew his favorite mug had slipped from his hand. The lounge chatter died instantly. When Mark finally spoke, the mild, mannered teacher was gone. His voice was a low, guttural growl he had never heard in 6 years. I am leaving now, he said. Lock the door. Keep her away. The line went dead. He was already running to his car. I had to move fast. Mark would be home in 20 minutes. But a husband couldn't stop a fake court order. I opened my contacts to find Sarah. 2 years ago, I designed the branding for her law firm. She was a woman who destroyed opposing counsel for sport. I started the call on speakerphone. As it connected, I attached the high-resolution images I had just snapped. I sent the photos of the fake psychiatric hold and the forged notary seal. I sent the fraudulent custody petition with my father's fake signature. Sarah answered with her usual crisp greeting. I cut her off and told her to check her email. I paced the nursery with Arthur held tight. The rug under my bare feet offered zero comfort. I listened to Sarah clicking her mouse. Then, the clicking stopped. A silence stretched across the line heavier than gravity. The kind of quiet that precedes a disaster. It was the silence of a spotting a fatal threat. Leela, she said, her voice was sterile and clinical. Tell me your mother does not know you found these. I confirmed my mother, Janet, was downstairs mopping, totally oblivious. Sarah exhaled sharply. She explained the lethal mechanics of the papers in that tote bag. In our state, family courts move fast when a child is in danger. A judge could sign an emergency order based on medical lies before his morning coffee got cold. The removal of the child happens first. The hearing happens later. Sarah warned that my mother paid for a psychiatric affidavit, they labeling me a psychotic threat. If she filed this at the courthouse tomorrow morning, a judge would sign an emergency order immediately. By noon, child services and police would be at my door. They would take Arthur. They would place me on involuntary psychiatric hold. The nursery walls seemed to tilt inward. The room felt like a closing vice. My parents weren't just playing games. They were plotting my institutionalization. They planned to lock me in a ward and sedate me while my sister claimed my son. He asked Sarah what to do. I wanted to march downstairs and flip the dining table. I wanted to grab Janet by the collar and throw her onto the lawn. The primal urge to protect my baby roared in my blood. You can't confront her, Sarah ordered. Her voice was a whip. Listen to me very carefully. Her whole plan relies on you losing control. She wants you to scream. She wants you to throw those papers. She wants you to look unhinged. If you confront her now, she will record your reaction and show it to a judge tomorrow. She will say, look at how unstable she is. You would hand her the exact evidence she needs to steal your baby. The reality of her warning settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I could not act on my rage. I had to become a master actress. You must wear a mask, she said. You know nothing. Go back downstairs, smile, thank her for the cleaning, drink her tea, watch her drive away. Do you understand? Give her zero ammunition, I agreed. Sarah said she was clearing her schedule for 48 hours to build a fortress of medical records and text messages. But first, I had to survive the afternoon. The call ended. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection. Dark circles bruised my eyes. My hair was a messy knot. I looked exactly like the vulnerable. Broken target, Janet described in her fake journal. I took a breath. I forced my muscles to relax and practiced a soft, tired smile. It felt grotesque, like stretching synthetic skin over a skull. I had to look in the eyes of a predator and act like she was just a help grandmother. I kissed Arthur's head. He smelled like warm milk. He needed me to play this part perfectly. I unlocked the door. The click echoed in the hall. I stepped out, hit by the sharp scent of lemon cleaner. I placed my hand on the banister, preparing to face the woman waiting to destroy my life. Any wrong move would cost me my son. He walked in the kitchen, carrying a secret heavier than the child in my arms. Janet stood by the sink, rinsing a sponge. She looked up and flashed a smile so sickeningly sweet it made me want to gag. She squeezed the sponge dry. Did he finally go down? She asked, her voice dripping with practiced warmth. You look exhausted, Leela. You are running yours ragged. Let me take him for the night. You need to sleep. The audacity was a physical blow. She was offering me rest while plotting to lock me in a psychiatric ward. He forced my face to stay neutral. I gave a slow, blank nod, using my real exhaustion to sell the performance. Then, tires crunched on the gravel outside. Mark burst through the front door. Minutes later, his stride was aggressive. He played the role of the stressed husband perfectly. He threw his bag down and rubbed his temples, claiming he felt sick and had to leave work early. Janet's face fell. The health grandmother routine evaporated, replaced by clear annoyance. She never liked Mark, to her. He was just a public school teacher preventing a toddler from accessing her daughter from accessing real wealth. His arrival ruined whatever economics she had planned for the afternoon. She shoved her supplies into a bucket, then zipped her bag. The brass teeth clicked shut over the forged papers. She gave Evan a chilly smile, told him to hydrate, and left. Once her car turned the corner, the air in our house turned cold. The place felt like a crime scene. Evan locked the door, his face pale with terror. You okay? He whispered. Is he safe? I nodded, clutching Leo close, and told Evan everything. The forged seal, the fake evaluation, and that blue journal of my mother's. Evan's hands balled into fists. If she's building a case, I said, my voice shaking, she must be watching me. She barely visits. She needs eyes inside this house. Evan didn't wait. We started tearing the place apart, moving like ghosts to keep the baby asleep. Evan checked the kitchen while I scanned the dining room, feeling under the heavy table where her bag had been. Nothing. We moved to the living room as the afternoon light cast long shadows over the floor. Evan approached the fireplace. He shifted a photo, then a cactus. He froze. He was staring at his history books because the sunlight hit them just right, casting a long, dark shape against the brick. In the middle of that shadow, a tiny red light pulsed. Evan reached behind a biography and pulled out a small black cube, a hidden camera. My knees gave out. He sat on the sofa, holding Leo, struggling to breathe. I had nursed my son right here. I had sobbed on this very rug, thinking I was alone in my own private sanctuary. I had paced this floor at 3 a.m., singing to a fussy baby in my sweats. Every private struggle of new motherhood had been recorded by my own mother. We were trapped in a panopticon built by my own flesh and blood. She turned my home into an observation deck, hunting for one moment of weakness to weaponize in court. Evan just stood there, analyzing the plastic device with a cold, hard stare. He didn't smash it. He pressed his thumbnail in the side, and a tiny memory card popped out. Let's see what she's been watching, he whispered. He grabbed his laptop and sat at the dining table, the same spot where those fake papers had been just an hour before. He slid the card in the port. He sat beside him, holding Leo. As the screen flickered to life, a folder full of video files popped up. Each one was time-stamped. The first clip was from 3 days after we brought Leo home. Sheedy planted it on her very first visit. Evan clicked the oldest file. The footage was grainy but clear. It showed me sitting on the sofa, looking down at my sleeping newborn. We skipped through a dozen more. It was just mundane life, folding laundry, grading papers, eating cold toast. Nothing incriminating. No neglect. No psychosis, just two tired parents trying to survive. But my mother wasn't looking for reality. She was looking for a weapon. We scrolled through the list until we hit a cluster of videos from yesterday afternoon. Evan clicked the one from 2:15. The room was empty until Barbara walked in. She was alone. I was upstairs, and Evan was at work. She walked to the mantel with a duster. She checked her phone and started talking. Since the house was quiet, the camera estimate caught every word. We weren't just seeing my mother. We were about to hear her whole conspiracy. This was no longer just a custody fight, it was a criminal act. The kitchen was deathly quiet, save for the laptop fan. We sat at the island, bathed in the harsh blue light of the screen, waiting for the truth. Evan had already lined the clips up in chronological order, just like he did with his history archives. Each file was a fresh invasion. We watched my postpartum life play out in high definition. He clicked the first few thumbnails. The player launched. I saw Mice pacing the rug at 3 in the morning in stained sweatpants, rocking a screaming baby. I watched Mice collapse in tears of total exhaustion. A cold dread hit my stomach. The woman who birthed me had sat at home, reviewing these clips. She watched her daughter bleeding and healing, and instead of helping, she cataloged it all as raw material. She hunted through my private pain, looking for a moment to twist into a story of insanity. Evan squeezed my knee. He didn't say a word, just kept clicking through the calendar until we reached yesterday afternoon. 2:15. I beat that J. I was upstairs trying to nap while Leo slept. Barbara was downstairs playing the role of the helpful grandmother. Evan double-clicked the file. The video showed our sunlit living room. For 10 seconds, it was empty. Then Barbara strolled in wearing a beige cardigan and carrying a feather duster. She looked perfectly laxed, humming a tune that the mic picked up perfectly. She swiped the duster across our photos, then stopped. She pulled her phone from her pocket and held it to her ear. The house was silent, and the camera was incredibly sensitive. "Ken," she said, her voice crisp. She was talking to my father. We couldn't hear his voice, but we didn't need to. Her words were enough. "Yes, the doctor signed the evaluation," she said, her voice echoing through the speakers. "It cost a bit extra to lock that signature without a physical, but it is done. The paperwork is sealed. Tell Sarah to get that nursery painted by Friday. She is obsessing over paint chips and we are out of time. We file the motion tomorrow." My chest tightened. She was talking about tearing my family apart and stealing my son, all while critiquing wall colors. She was ice cold. She straightened a vase while casually planning a crime. There was a pause as my father asked a question. Barbara sighed, dripping with fake annoyance. "No, the judge will not notice," she snapped. "The narrative is set. Sarah is a wreck. She is barely holding on. But to make this emergency order stick, I need a visual, something real." She turned, facing the hidden camera. A chilling grin spread across her face. "I will drop the sleeping pills into her tea tomorrow morning," she said. Mike froze. His hand jerked from the trackpad like it had turned to fire. "She drinks a cup daily at 10, Barbara added, voice airy and light. "A heavy dose will knock her out cold. When the baby starts crying, she will not hear a thing. She will be completely dead to the world." That is when I filmed the neglect. A screaming child and a mother passed out on the sofa. The judge will sign the emergency order before noon. The video kept rolling, but Mike and I were finished watching. Our kitchen suddenly felt like a tomb. My ears started ringing. She was not just watching me. She was not just exaggerating to win a custody fight. She was actively plotting to poison me. She meant to drug my tea, knock me out, and let my newborn son suffer just to get what she wanted. This was calculated assault. It was child abuse. I looked at my husband. The calm high school teacher who lived for grading papers was gone. His jaw was locked tight, his hands, gripping the counter, were white, knuckled. A dark rage burned in his eyes. "I am calling the cops," Mike muttered. His voice was a dangerous growl. "I am calling them now and having her arrested for attempted assault." He reached for his phone, but I grabbed his arm. My heart was pounding. But Maline's legal advice echoed in my head. "We cannot," I whispered. Mike stared at me, eyes wide. "She just confessed to poisoning me. Sarah, we have it on tape. If we call now, she will claim it was a joke," I explained, finding my voice. "She will hire a shark who claims it was an illegal wiretap or just a hypothetical conversation." Maline warned me, "If we strike too early, my parents will panic. They will destroy the forged documents. They will burn the fake diary Sarah wrote. They will bury the evidence and paint us as the crazy ones." Mike closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath. He understood the long game. "Meline told us to build a fortress," he continued. "We need them to walk into court and lie under oath. We need Barbara to hand that fake psych report to the clerk. Once she commits perjury, once she files those lies, we spring the trap. We used this video to destroy them in front of the judge. Mike opened his eyes. The rage had shifted into cold, tactical focus. He nodded. He turned to the laptop and began duplicating the footage, creating encrypted backups on 3 separate drives. We had the weapon. We had the motive. We had everything needed for a permanent order and a criminal case. But as the adrenaline faded, a new terror set in. Barbara intended to drug me this morning. She only failed because Mike came home sick, ruining her setup. She had packed her bag, clearly fuming. Her main play for the neglect video had failed. A woman as ruthless as my mother would not just quit. She had a deadline. She promised Sarah the baby would be hers by Friday. If the pills failed, she would move to plan B. She needed a paper trail of danger before court opened tomorrow. I checked the microwave clock, 1:45. If she could not stage the evidence herself, she would outsource the work. She would make the state do it. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite chime. It was a series of sharp, aggressive rings, followed by 3 heavy knocks. Mike and I shared a terrified look. The custody war had not even started, and Barbara had already fired her next shot. I stood, smoothing my shirt, preparing to face the authority my mother had weaponized against me. The knocks echoed through the house, rattling the floorboards. I looked at Mike, my heart hitting my ribs like a bird in a cage. We just caught her planning to drug me, and now the state was at our door. This brings us back to that exact moment. He handed Leo to my husband, fixed my shirt, pushed back my hair, and opened the door. A woman stood there in a beige coat, holding a heavy clipboard. A silver badge hung around her neck. She said she was a Child Protective Service investigator. Her voice was flat, robotic, completely cold. She told me they received an anonymous tip on their emergency line 30 minutes ago. The caller claimed I was hoarding weapons, suffering from postpartum psychosis, and starving my 3-week-old son. My mother, stopped by Mike coming home early, had pivoted to her backup plan. She needed proof of neglect before court. If she could not film it herself, she would trick the government into doing it for her. I stepped as letting the investigator in. Panic hit me, sharp and bitter. But I remembered Melane's orders. Any sign of anger, any shaky breath, any tears would be marked on that clipboard as instability. I had to be the calmest person on earth. He offered a tired, polite smile. I led her to the kitchen and offered coffee. She refused, eyes scanning the room, hunting for the chaos the tip promised. She found only peace. The kitchen smelled of lemon cleaner ironically. The same brand my mother tried to use to frame me. I showed her the fridge. I opened the doors, revealing shelves full of fresh food, prep meals, and organized rows of labeled breast milk. She scribbled a note. I led her upstairs to the nursery. The afternoon sun washed the yellow room in a soft, peaceful glow. The felt stars hung motionless over the crib. Then I showed her Leo. He was awake, resting on Mike's shoulder in the living room. Leo cooed, a soft, happy sound, kicking his little legs. He had bright eyes and chubby cheeks. He was the picture of a thriving, loved baby. The investigator's professional mask softened. She asked standard questions about my mental health and our routine. I answered every question with steady precision. I did not talk about my work deadlines or Mike's teaching job. I kept the focus strictly on Leo's doctor visits and his feeding schedule. When we finished, we sat at the dining table. The investigator prepared to leave, seemingly ready to dismiss the call as a mistake. But Mike was not letting this end as a footnote. He needed this visit on the record. Mike cleared his throat. He leaned in and asked the investigator if she often dealt with retaliatory calls made by angry relatives. She froze, pen hovering over the paper. Her eyes flicked up, face tightening into forced calm. She muttered that false reports were hard to prove. Evan stayed quiet. He just opened his laptop and angled it toward her. We weren't revealing the hidden camera footage yet. We needed that for the family court judge. If she filed a report now, it might spark an arrest and tip off Barbara too early. Instead, Evan pulled up the high-res photos I took. He showed her the emergency custody filing. He zoomed in on the fake blue seal. He broke down the digital artifacts, the cloned pixels, and the uneven font. He pointed to my father's signature, right by the box calling me unfit. Then he clicked to the next image, the navy leather journal. He scrolled through shots of Olivia's handwriting, entries dated 2 years ahead, describing my fake breakdown. Evans spelled out the motive. He detailed my sister's wealth, her infertility battles, and my mother's obsession with class status. The investigator's posture changed. The authority melted away. She slumped. Her professional mask cracked, revealing deep, genuine exhaustion. She rubbed her temples and let out a long, ragged sigh. It was the sound of someone reeling they were being used as a pawn in a family war. They turn us into weapons, she whispered. Losing her official tone, she snapped her clipboard shut. It happens all the time. People use this agency to settle grudges. And it steals help from kids who are actually in danger. She looked at me with weary, real sympathy. She promised to close the file right now. She'd demark it as malicious and unsubstantiated, which would was a shield in court. Your son is totally safe here, she said, standing up. I am so sorry your family is doing this. I walked her out and thanked her. As her car pulled away, Eded bolted the door and leaned against the wood. We survived the inspection. But the violation left me feeling hollow. My mother had sent the government to tear my life apart. She forced me to defend my sanity in my own living room. The adrenaline left me in a rush. My knees shook. Evan pulled me in his arms. We stood there in the quiet, the silence of the house feeling heavy. We survived the day, but this war was costing me everything. Sartre wasn't done yet. The sun sank, searching for a moment of peace. But the universe wasn't done yet. Turning the sky a bruise. The sun sank, turning the casting shadows. Things buzzed on, casting long shadows. I went to close the curtains. My hand hit the fabric when a familiar silver sedan turned onto our street. It slowed and stopped right at our mailbox. The lights cut through the dusk, hitting the pavement. The door opened. A man stepped out. He didn't move with my mother's sharp, arrogant stride. His steps were heavy, hesitant, and weak. It was my father, Ken. He stood at the edge of the grass, staring at our home. The man who signed the paper saying I was dangerous. My father, the silent, cowardly partner in the plot to steal my child. And he was here alone. The evening air felt charged with a coming storm. I watched his shadow stretch across the concrete, wondering what lie he had rehearsed. Would he try to justify his signature? Would he try to gaslight me into giving up? Or maybe, just maybe, the weight of his betrayal had finally shattered his loyalty to Barbara? I let the curtain drop and braced for the knock. My father walked up the driveway. The streetlights flickered, casting long, strange shadows. Ken wasn't an imposing guy. For years, he was just a quiet satellite orbiting my mother. He spent 30 years in middle management, mastering how to keep his head down. Growing up, Ken was the family's shock absorber. When Barbara wanted a room painted, Ken worked overtime to pay for it. When Barbara called my art a waste of time, Ken would quietly slide me a sketchbook. But he never actually stood up for me. He trained us to walk on eggshells, pretending his cowardice was just keeping the peace. His whole life was a study in choosing the easiest path. And right now, that path led straight to my front porch. The air felt thick, ready to snap. I turned to Evan. He stood in the hallway, holding Leo, his jaw tight. I told my husband to step back. This was my father. I had to handle this. I needed to look him in the eye and see how deep the betrayal went. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack, leaving the security chain on. A cold breeze slipped in, carrying the scent of his cedar aftershave, a smell that used to mean breakfast and safety. Tonight, it made my stomach churn. Ken stood on the mat, shifting his weight. His hands were buried in his pockets. He looked tired. He wouldn't look at me, staring at the house numbers instead. Lila, he began, his voice low and shaky. He cleared his throat and tried to sound like a concerned father. Your mother is just worried about you, sweetheart. We both are. You look worn out. I said nothing. I kept my face a blank mask, waiting for him to play his cards. The silence hung between us, heavy and sharp. Ken shifted his feet, clearly unnerved by my silence. He pulled a hand from his pocket and rubbed his neck. We just want what is best for Leo. He went on, talking faster. You have to admit, things are a little unstable. Your freelance work is shaky. Evan is just a teacher. Olivia has the space, the resource. Marcus makes a great living, and they have been trying for a baby for years. Maybe letting Olivia take Leo for a few months is the right move. Just until you get back on your feet. She can afford the best care and doctors. It would be stable. I stared at the man on my porch. He was pulling the classic Abla move, trying to frame a kidnapping as a nice, helpful favor. Trying to sell the theft of my child as a logical business deal. The cowardice was breathtaking. He was too terrified to stand up to his wife. So he came here to convince his own daughter to give up her child. There was no love in his eyes, just a desperate need to keep Barbara happy and maintain the status quo of his miserable life. I let him finish his script. When he finally stopped talking, I locked eyes with him. "You signed the affidavit." "Dad," I said. My voice was cold, flat. The reaction was instant. All the color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sick, gray shade. His jaw went slack. He blinked rapidly, terrified. He didn't know I'd seen the papers in her purse. He thought the legal move was still a secret waiting to be used tomorrow. "I do not know what you mean," he stammered, taking a clumsy step back. His voice cracked. "I just came to talk. I haven't signed anything." "Don't lie to me," I whispered, my tone sharp enough to cut. "I saw the petition for guardianship. I saw the fake psych report calling me psychotic. And I saw your signature. I saw your precise, neat handwriting right on the co-petitioner line. You used your favorite blue pen, the same ink you used to brand me an unfit mother." Dad seemed to shrink. The facade of the caring father shattered, leaving a hollow, frightened man in the cold. He reached out. "Leela, please," he begged, his words tripping over each other. He claimed it was just a safety measure. He said we needed the paperwork ready in case I had a breakdown and needed a facility. I did not even read it. I just signed where he pointed. His excuse was worse than the act. He authorized the legal destruction of my life without reading a single word. He was ready to dump me in a ward and hand my newborn to my sister because it was easier than saying no to her. That man I grew up with, a phantom. He never existed, just an empty vessel for whatever Barbara shouted. "You signed the paper claiming I was a danger to my own child." Every syllable tastes like ash. "You are not a father. You are a coward. You are dead to me." I did not wait for an answer. The sight of him standing there pitiful and weak filled me with hollow disgust. I slammed the oak door shut. The latch clicked home. I turned the deadbolt, the metallic thud echoing through the foyer, and slid the chain lock into place. Through the glass, I watched his silhouette. He hovered on the porch, hand raised as if to knock, then let it drop. He shuffled back to his sedan, a defeated messenger retreating from a failed campaign. The engine roared, and headlights swept across the room as he backed away, vanishing in the dark. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. The battle lines were drawn. No more ambiguity, no more hoping for a miracle. They thought they could bully a fragile, tired girl into submission. They did not realize they were dealing with a mother protecting her cub. I took a slow breath, feeling my pulse settle. Evan walked in, his face etched with grim understanding. He handed me my phone. The screen flashed with a relentless barrage of messages. Olivia, emboldened by my father's failure, was on the offensive. A manic stream of texts, dripping with delusional entitlement. "You are being so selfish." The first one read, "You can always have another one when you are stable. I have a nursery waiting." The next hit a second later. "Lou deserves a life without the stress you are putting him through. Mom says you are falling apart. Just do the right thing and let us take over." Her delusion was staggering. She thought her husband's bank account meant she owned my biology. She did not see Leo as a child. She saw him as a coveted accessory she had pre-ordered, and I was the vendor refusing delivery. "If you make this difficult, Mom is filing papers tomorrow," she threatened. The mask was off. The quiet phase of their conspiracy ended. The war was beginning. My phone buzzed on the granite counter. I stood in the hall, watching the screen light up the room. Olivia had launched her assault. Since my father failed, my sister decided diplomacy was a waste. She sent message after message, each one a beacon of her entitlement. I picked up the device. The screen filled with walls of text. "You are being selfish, Ela." The first block read, "You can have another baby when you are secure. Marcus and I are ready. Leo deserves a life without your stress. Mom says you are falling apart. Just do the right thing and let us take over." I stared at the pixels. Olivia did not see my son as human. She saw an accessory she had pre-ordered. And I was the uncooperative vendor. She lived in a pristine bubble funded by Marcus, a wealth management executive who preferred his life quiet. Marcus voided drama. Olivia thrived on it. For years, she monetized her infertility online, crying in designer silk about empty rooms. Now she believed her suffering entitled her to claim my child. Her husband's money was her justification. She thought a high tax bracket negated maternal bonds. My phone buzzed again, another demand. If you make this difficult, Mom is filing the papers tomorrow. Do not be stupid. We will win anyway. The urge to respond burned like acid. I wanted to send something so venomous it would shatter her screen. I wanted to tell her she would never come within 100 miles of my baby. My thumbs shook with the force of my restraint. But I remembered Maline's silence was our weapon. Every unhinged text was another brick in the fortress we were building. Reacting would only feed the lie that I was unstable. I did not reply. I pressed the buttons on my device, capturing screenshot after screenshot. The camera shutter clicked softly in the kitchen. Each image went to the secure folder Maline had set up. We had the fake evaluation. We had the forged notary seal. We had the recording of Barbara plotting a scheme. We were building an undeniable case for a permanent restraining order. But as I stood there, looking toward the room where my baby slept, a cold truth settled in. A court order was not enough. A piece of paper might keep them off my property, but it would not satisfy the primal anger in my chest. Barbara and Olivia survived on reputation. They needed to face total, public ruin. He walked in the dining room. Evan sat hunched over his laptop. The blue light cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting his determination. My husband teaches history. He knows that wars are not just won on physical battlefields. They are won by controlling information and exposing the truth. Evan was not just saving the camera video for a judge. He was weaponizing the data. He moved through digital folders with ruthless efficiency. He stripped the raw audio and video of any metadata that could compromise our location. He uploaded the footage to a private cloud server, creating an encrypted link that could not be taken down. Then he began mapping out an email distribution list, methodically cross-referencing public data and social media profiles. He found the email for the country club where Barbara held court. He located the corporate address for Marcus, knowing the wealth firm would panic at a scandal. He dug into Olivia's footprint, finding the contact list for her infertility support group. The women who offered her sympathy were about to see her conspiracy to kidnap a newborn. Evan looked up. His eyes met mine, reflecting a shared, cold resolve. We were not just defending ourselves in court. We were preparing to scorch the earth they walked on. The trap was set. The legal trap was set. We spent the night reviewing the timeline. My attorney Maline confirmed the morning emergency hearing. Barbara had filed her fake paperwork just as promised. The hearing was at 9 at the county courthouse. I couldn't sleep. I just laid there, listening to my baby breathe in his bassinet, counting down the hours until dawn. The night dragged on, heavy with dread. When the sun finally hit the horizon, painting the sky gold, I got up. I showered, scrubbing away 3 weeks of exhaustion. I dressed with purpose. Forget the baggy sweats I pulled on a sharp black blazer and a crisp blouse. I slicked my hair back and applied makeup to hide the dark circles. The woman in the mirror wasn't the fragile target Barbara had described. She was a mother ready for war. Evan wore his charcoal suit, looking like the protector he is. We buckled Leo into his seat and grabbed our bag of digital evidence. The drive to downtown Cincinnati was dead silent. Morning traffic flowed around us, oblivious to our world falling apart. We pulled into the courthouse garage, the engine echo bouncing off concrete. We pushed through the heavy glass doors and cleared security. The place smelled like cheap coffee and floor wax. We found our courtroom through the maze of halls. Maline was waiting by the heavy doors with a folder. She wore a gray suit and the focused intensity of a shark. She nodded at Evan's briefcase. Everything was ready. The mass email was primed in his outbox, one click, and it was over. The doors swung open. The bailiff signaled us in. The air conditioning hit like ice. I braced myself. The judge would be taking the bench any second. I glanced across the aisle, waiting for my mother to start her lies. What kind of script had she bought to justify stealing my son? Inside, the courthouse was a meat locker. We walked into the courtroom, greeted by that same wall of frigid air. It smelled like lemon wax and old paper, a sterile place where families go to break. My heels clicked on the marble. Evan walked beside me, his jaw locked tight, clutching the briefcase with our evidence inside. We found our table and sat down. Melline was already there, calm and lethal. She motioned for us to take our seats. I folded my hands to hide the shaking. Evan kept the briefcase beneath his grip, never loosening. I forced myself across the room. My mother, Barbara, sat 10 feet away, though it felt like a canyon. She had curated her look perfectly for the judge. No expensive blazers today. She wore a soft beige cardigan and minimal makeup, faking a look of exhausted, heartbroken grandmotherly grief. She sat with her spine straight, staring at the empty bench beside her. Ken looked sick. He was pale, sweating, and drowning in a suit 2 sizes too big. He wouldn't even look in my direction, staring only at his shoes. His cowardice was pathetic. He was just a shell. I looked past them to the gallery. Olivia was there, wearing a camel coat and holding a designer bag. She leaned forward, tracking me like a predator. She gave me a cold, venomous glare, tapping her nails on her purse. She was so smug. She really thought this was just a formality. She saw this court as a retail counter where she was waiting for a receipt. She had no idea her reputation was about to be burned to the ground. The door behind the bench opened. The bailiff announced the judge. Judge Galler entered, an older man with silver hair and eyes that had seen it all. He sat down, put on his glasses, and opened our file. The room went dead silent. Galler cleared his throat and told Barbara's lawyer to start. He wanted the justification for taking a 3-week-old infant. A man in a pinstripe suit stood up, Mr. Belmont. He buttoned his jacket and stepped into the center of the room. He didn't glance at me. He looked right at the judge. Your Honor, he began, his voice low and serious. We are here for an urgent, tragic matter. My client, Barbara Wright, is only here to save her grandson from danger, he claimed. He paced the carpet, milking the drama. He painted a picture of me as a mother falling apart. He attacked my career, calling my freelance illustration work unstable and unfit for a child. He even took shots at Evan S.'s teaching salary, trying to make our middle-class life seem stressful. But his whole argument was built on Barbara S. lies. He pointed to the folder on his table. The court knows the reality of postpartum psychosis, he said, dripping with fake sympathy. It's a thief that steals a mother's mind. My client has seen this decline firsthand over these past 3 weeks. She claims I had hysterical breakdowns, over spilled milk, and ignored my crying baby. He squeezed Evan S.'s hand under the table until my knuckles ached. I wanted to stand up and call him a liar, but Malene had warned me. Any outburst would just prove his story. I stayed frozen, staring at the wall behind the judge. Belmont picked up a paper and held it up to the fluorescent lights, showing off the blue ink. We aren't just relying on a grandmother's fear, he declared, his voice booming. We have a sworn affidavit and a formal psychiatry evaluation. A psychologist confirmed the biological mother poses a real, immediate threat to her child. Mr. Belmont slapped a forged document onto the table. He gestured to my sister in the gallery. We are asking this court for emergency guardianship for the maternal aunt, Olivia, he announced. She has the wealth, a stable home, and the devotion needed to protect this baby, while the mother gets the serious psychiatric help she needs. We must sign this order before tragedy strikes. He sat down. The silence was suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, adding to the tension. Judge Galler folded his hands over the file, his face a stoic mask of experience. He knew the weight of this. An ex parte order would let the state take a nursing from his mother with a hearing. It was the nuclear option. The judge looked toward our table, then locked eyes with Evan. He studied me, noting my posture and the exhaustion in my eyes. Then he turned to my lawyer. Counselor, the judge said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. These are grave allegations. A sworn medical report declaring your client a danger is not taken lightly. He adjusted his glasses, peering down from the bench. Does your client have a response? I felt the room shift. The trap was set. Barbara had walked into a courtroom, presented fake documents, and committed perjury to facilitate a kidnapping. Malene stood up. Her movements were calm, not theatrical like Belmont. She adjusted her suit jacket and stood firm, radiating the lethal confidence of a woman holding a winning hand. Your Honor, Malene said, holding his gaze, we do not just have a response to these claims. We have proof of a felony. Malene stepped out from behind the heavy oak table. She did not carry a pile of messy files, just a sleek leather portfolio. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the marble, echoing through the room. She walked to the partition and handed a manila envelope to the bailiff. Everyone held their breath. Even the humming air conditioning seemed to vanish. The bailiff passed the envelope up to Judge Gallagher. The judge adjusted his silver glasses, opening the clasp to pull out 3 high-definition photos we had printed the night before. One was the fake psychiatric report. The second zoomed in on the notary seal. The third magnified the image until the pixelated squares were obvious. Malene cleared her throat, her voice ringing out with the sharp authority of a predator. "Your Honor," she began, her posture rigid as she watched the bench. Opposing counsel presented a medical report claiming it justifies taking a nursing fit. My client is a professional digital artist. She spends 12 hours a day working with graphics and high-resolution images. When she saw the paperwork in the petitioner's purse, she spotted digital artifacts around that blue stamp. The judge frowned, leaning in to examine the glossy photos. He traced a finger over the magnified image as Malene continued pacing. She pointed out that the letters were misaligned. The ink did not bleed into the paper like a real stamp. "It is a digital clone, Your Honor. A fake image pasted onto document before printing. We checked the name on that seal with the state database. The notary retired 5 years ago and lives in a memory care facility. This is a total forgery." Across the aisle, Belmont froze. His empathy evaporated instantly. He opened his mouth but said nothing. He snapped his head around to stare at Barbara. His face drained of color as he realized his firm had just fed falsified evidence to a judge. Barbara sat paralyzed. Her panic was obvious. Her beige cardigan looked like a straitjacket. Next to her, my father Ken hung his head, as if waiting for a blow. Belmont tried to scramble, muttering about clerical errors and third-party mistakes. He raised his hands, trying to create doubt. Malene shut him down immediately. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing the small black cube Evan found behind our books. She placed it on the railing. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Malene said, cutting Belmont off, "we have proof that the petitioner installed illegal surveillance inside my client's home. This hidden camera was found yesterday, placed right where my client nurses her newborn son." Judge Gallagher stared at the black cube. The room turned freezing. The judge's stoic mask cracked, replaced by simmering rage. Judges hate perjury, but they despise those who manipulate the court while violating privacy. His eyes narrowed into cold slits. He looked past Barbara to her attorney. "Did your client place hidden recording devices in the home?" the magistrate asked, his voice a low rumble. Belmont knew he was standing on a landmine. He stepped away from Barbara, distancing him from the blast. "Your Honor, I have no knowledge of this device. I need a moment to consult with my client." He turned to whisper frantically to Barbara, trying to keep her seated. He understood the danger of an open microphone in court. He needed to stop her from talking. But Barbara was driven by the assumption that she was the smartest person in the room. Her narcissism prevented her from listening. She believed her wealth and social status granted her total immunity, refusing to look like a scolded child. "Her chair back." She shoved her chair back, the legs screeching against the marble. The sound sliced through the tension. "I was trying to gather proof for the court," she announced. Dripping with arrogance, she pointed a finger right at my chest. "She is a danger to my grandson. I did what any responsible grandmother would do." Belmont pinched the bridge of his nose and let out a defeated breath. He knew the case was dead. The silence was suffocating. In the gallery, Olivia sat frozen, her smug expression melted into shock, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her bag. She finally realized that the party was over, and the bill was due. Ken stared at his shoes, wishing the floor would swallow him. Beside me, Evan sat still, projecting cold, unyielding strength. The trap he built was working perfectly. Judge Gallagher removed his reading glasses. He folded his glasses and set them on the thigh. He leaned forward, resting on the bench, fingers locked. He glared at my mother with icy, judicial fury. The room went dead silent. The judge spoke, every word hitting like a hammer. "You are admitting, Mrs. Vane, that you broke the law to spy inside a private home." Barbara stood tall. "I had to protect the child, Your Honor. She is not safe there." The judge didn't blink. He turned, ignoring her, and faced my attorney. "Counselor," he snapped, his voice tight. "Do you have the footage from this illegal device?" Malene nodded. A tiny smirk played on her lips as she reached into her bag. She pulled out the small drive Evan had prepped. "Yes, Your Honor, we have the files. We also have audio that proves the petitioner's exact motives for this custody filing. The clip is ready." The judge pointed at the bailiff. Take that drive. Plug it into the monitor. Let's see what kind of proof Mrs. Vane gathered. The officer grabbed the drive and hooked it to the court console. A massive screen on the wall flickered to life. The court reporter stopped typing, watching the screen. Beside me, Evan didn't look up. He opened his laptop, pulled up a pre-drafted email, and checked the list. Hundreds of contacts from our family's entire social circle sat in the blind copy field. Evan kept his finger hovering over the enter key, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The video hit the screen. My living room appeared, crystal clear. Then, Barbara walked into frame with a feather duster, playing the role of the doting grandmother. In the back, Olivia leaned forward. Gripping the railing, she looked confused. She had no idea her mother had been filming in secret, planning to spring this fake evidence as a surprise win. As the secret plot began to unfold, Barbara pulled out her phone on screen. The audio was crystal clear, echoing off the wood panels. My father slumped in his chair, hearing his name. Yes, the doctor signed it. The recording said, "He cost extra since there was no physical exam. But it is done. Make sure Olivia has that nursery painted by Friday." A murmur rippled through the gallery. People there, for simple traffic cases, were now watching a felony unfold. Barbara's casual talk of bribery hung in the cold air. On screen, she turned to the lens, smiling chillingly. "I will slip the sleeping pills into her tea tomorrow morning," she said. A gasp erupted from the crowd. It was pure, raw shock. "She drinks a cup every day at 10. The video continued. "A heavy dose ensures she sleeps through the morning. When the baby cries, she won't hear him. She will be out cold. That is when I will record the neglect." Evan didn't wait. The second the word neglect hit the air, he smashed the enter key. The email launched, blasting the truth to every contact in our circle. It hit the servers of Marcus' firm, the country club, and every woman in Olivia's support group. We were burning their entire social standing to the ground. Judge Gallard didn't wait for the end. He slammed his gavel with explosive force. The crack sounded like a gunshot. "Silence in the room, counselor," he roared, his face purple with rage. Mr. Belmont jumped, looking pale in his expensive suit. "Your client isn't a grandmother," the judge barked, leaning over the bench. "She is a criminal. You brought a fake evaluation to my court, and we just heard a confession to assault and child endangerment." Belmont threw his hands up. "Your Honor, I swear, I had no idea about any of this. I only used the documents I was given." "I believe you, counselor," the judge snapped, "because if I thought you were in on a plot to drug a nursing mother, you would be under arrest right now." Barbara sat frozen. The mask was gone. The woman who had pulled every string in this family for decades had finally run out of options. She was trapped. Then, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was Olivia. She stood up in the gallery, her coat falling off. She wasn't crying for the right reasons. She was having a full-blown meltdown. "But the nursery is already painted," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "We picked the wallpaper. Marcus bought the crib. You promised me Friday." She stomped her foot like a child. She pointed at me, mascara running down her face. "It is not fair. You can't even afford a private preschool. He belongs with me." The courtroom stared in silence. Olivia's just confirmed the whole conspiracy. She didn't care about the forgery or the drugs. She only cared that her custom-ordered baby wasn't arriving on time. The judge looked sick. He pointed his gavel. "Bailiff," he commanded, his voice cutting through her sobbing. "Get her out of my courtroom, now. If she resists, arrest her." Two deputies grabbed Olivia by the arms. She thrashed, screaming about her nursery and her wealthy husband. But as they dragged her through the doors, something else happened. The second-day trap went off. Her phone in her handbag began to vibrate. A steady, low vibration echoed through the courtroom. Then my mother's phone buzzed. Then my father's jacket pocket hummed. The blast had hit its target. Influential board members and corporate elite were watching the footage right now. The fallout was happening in real time. My mother stared at her phone, her face draining of color. She wasn't just losing this custody battle. She was losing her entire world. The trap had closed with brutal perfection. Now, the only question was how the judge would finish them. Guards shoved Olivia through the heavy doors. But her muffled panic was quickly drowned out. A rhythmic hum rose from the table. My mother stared at her luxury handbag as the device inside rang. A second later, a distinct buzz came from my father's gray suit. Then, A chorus of notifications chimed from the defense table as the evidence hit every phone in the room. Evan sat beside me, the silent architect of their downfall. We both knew those pings meant the video of my mother confessing to assault was going viral among her elite social circle. I pictured her country club president spilling coffee in shock. I imagined Marcus in his office watching his wife scream about a painted nursery while orchestrating a kidnapping. Marcus spent his whole career avoiding scandal. This was his nightmare. Finding out his wife was a felon would end their lavish marriage. I imagined the women in her infertility group realizing they're barren. Tragic sister was actually a predator trying to steal a nephew. The vibrations on the table grew into a chorus of condemnation. My family was watching their social standing evaporate. Judge Gallagher ignored the phones, locking his stern, calculated gaze on the panicked defense lawyer. Mr. Belmont looked ready to vanish in the marble floor. The judge steepled his fingers, casting a shadow over the room. This court has seen dark things, Gallagher began, his voice like ice. But the sheer audacity of this petition is the worst abuse of the system I have ever encountered. You weaponized the law to steal an infant. You forged medical records. You plotted to incapacitate a mother. He grabbed the emergency petition and drew a thick, black line across the cover, a final mark of disgust. I am denying this petition with prejudice. The judge declared. That was the legal kill shot. Barbara could never fight this again. The door to my son was welded shut by her own arrogance. But the judge wasn't done. He turned to Malene, my attorney, who stood with the lethal grace of a victor. Counselor, Gallagher said, I am granting your request for a permanent, lifetime restraining order. The radius covers you, your husband, and your son. It applies to Barbara, Kenneth, and Olivia. They cannot come within 1,000 feet of your home, your workplace, or the child's doctor. Any violation means immediate jail time without bail. Dad slumped, burying his face in his hands. A ragged, hollow sob escaped him. The coward who spent 30 years avoiding conflict had finally hit a wall he couldn't sidestep. He would never see his grandson grow up. He traded his own daughter for his wife's approval, and it left him bankrupt. Barbara didn't cry. She stared at her handbag like it held a venomous snake. Her facade fractured into a million pieces. The beige cardigan suddenly looked like a prison uniform. She realized the country club lunches were over. The neighborhood respect was gone. The image of the flawless matriarch was dead. And Evan had live-streamed the funeral to everyone she knew. The judge held up the silver flash drive, letting the lights catch the metal. This court cannot prosecute crimes, Gallagher stated, his voice a low rumble. However, I have a duty to report felony conduct. I am ordering these exhibits, including the forged notary seal, walked across the street to the district attorney before lunch. Mr. Belmont flinched, frantically stuffing his pens into his briefcase, desperate to distance him from the toxic fallout. He knew attorney privilege didn't cover a fraud on the court. He wanted no part of this investigation. I expect felony charges to be filed this week, the judge continued. Forgery, perjury, conspiracy to kidnap, it is all here. Get a criminal defense lawyer, Mrs. Wright. Your time in family court is over, but your time in the penal system is just starting. The gavel cracked down, finalizing the public execution. I looked at Barbara. She slowly met my gaze across the table. For the first time in 32 years, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with raw, wide-eyed fear. She built her conspiracy on a fatal miscalculation. She thought I was weak. She saw my freelance career and my exhaustion and assumed I was an easy target. She never understood that a mother protecting her child possesses a strength that defies logic. She hunted a rabbit and found a wolf. I held her gaze with cold finality. I felt no remorse. Evan picked up his briefcase, placing a steady hand on my back to guide me away. Malene walked beside us. We didn't look back as we pushed through the doors, leaving my parents to the wreckage of their lives. We stepped in the hallway. The sterile air felt fresh. The adrenaline that sustained me for 48 hours began to retreat, leaving my muscles aching. We had won the battle. We secured our family, but a new reality loomed ahead. The gavel fell. But the true consequences of our digital strike were just beginning to manifest. What happens when a toxic empire collapses overnight? That was 2 years ago. The doors of courtroom foresealed the fate of the people who tried to ruin me. The justice system usually moves at a crawl. But when greased by irrefutable digital evidence, it spins with devastating, relentless speed. The district attorney received the evidence that same day. By Friday, my mother was indicted by a grand jury. Her high-priced lawyer, who tried to paint me as a frantic mess, saw the evidence and knew he had lost. He told her to fold. Facing recordings of her plotting a chemical attack, Brenda pleaded guilty to felony conspiracy and fraud. She took the deal to avoid a public trial that would ruin her remaining social standing. She stood before the judge, stripped of her designer clothes, and listened as her sentence was read. She did 6 months in a state lockup. The woman who obsessed over zip codes spent half a year on a thin mattress, eating off a metal tray. Today, Brenda is on strict probation. Her passport is gone and her life is monitored. She attends weekly check-ins, enduring the exact bureaucratic humiliation she once looked down on. The elite circle she prized exiled her the second Mark sent that email. The country club cut her membership, citing their moral clause. The wealthy friends who once attended her dinner parties now cross the street to avoid her. She is a ghost, haunting the ruins of the image she spent decades building. My father, Frank, avoided prison by cooperating. He testified against his own wife to save his hide, confirming his lifelong cowardice. But his freedom came at a staggering cost. The legal bills to fight their case, his fight has drained his entire life savings. The retirement funds he spent 30 years building vanished into hourly fees for top-tier defense lawyers. The logistics firm where Frank worked in middle management quietly pushed him into early retirement. Corporate wanted no ties to a high-profile felony investigation involving forged seals. Frank now lives in a cramped apartment on the city outskirts. The walls are thin, the air smells like stale smoke, and he spends his days in a recliner, staring at a screen while eating microwave meals. He traded his only daughter and grandson to appease a tyrant. Now the tyrant is a felon, and he is entirely alone. No hobbies, no friends. He just waits for time to run out, drown in the quiet consequences of his own spinelessness. But the most poetic downfall was my sister, Sarah. The digital shockwave Mark unleashed hit her curated world with lethal precision. David, her investment banker husband, opened that link in his corner office. David spent his life mitigating risk. When he watched the video of his wife throwing a tantrum while her family plotted a kidnapping, his reaction was cold. No comfort, just lawyers. David filed for divorce and froze their accounts before the weekend was over. He locked her out of their mansion and killed her platinum credit cards. Sarah tried to pivot, seeking refuge in an online mom group. She logged on to social media, hoping to play the victim in a family dispute, but 50 women in her circle had received the same video. They watch her demand my child like a packet delivery. Her support group turned in a relentless digital court. They exposed her, posting screenshots of her toxic texts and demanding she own up to it. Her online empire crumbled, turning her from a tragic heroine into a universal pariah. Cut off from David and with her parents in debt, Sarah faced a reality she had avoided for 34 years. She had to work. The golden child who never held a job for long was forced to find work with no skills and a viral scandal to her name. Today, my sister works a shift at a big box store. She wears a stiff uniform and a cheap name tag. She spends 8 hours under harsh lights, folding sweaters and organizing clearance aisles. The cruelest irony, she works in children's apparel. Every day she must smile and ring up tiny outfits for new mothers, enduring the life of the working class she once despised. She goes home to a small duplex with aching feet and a bruised ego, counting her grocery money down to the cent. My family built a labyrinth of lies to steal my child and destroy my sanity. They wanted to frame me as a broken woman. Instead, they only managed to erase their own future. Their entitlement acted as the fuel that burned their kingdom down. They are isolated, bound only by bitter resentment. They hold no power over me. They don't know where I live. They don't know my number. The restraining order stands as an impenetrable wall, keeping their toxicity away from my son. The dust has settled. Their wreckage remains in Cincinnati, a monument to greed. But while they navigate the bleak reality they built, my husband and I found a different horizon. The legal battle ended, and we finally exhaled. We walked away from the blast zone with the only treasure that mattered. We sold the house and left the city filled with dark memories. With the villains defeated, a new question emerged. What does peace look like for a family that had to fight so hard just to survive the first month of parenthood? Where do I, Mark, and little Leo go when the war is over? As for us, we didn't stay in Columbus to watch the ashes of my parents' social life drift away. We sold the house within a month. We packed our lives into moving trucks and drove north, putting highway miles between us and the toxic people who tried to destroy us. We bought a quiet property in northern Ohio. Our new home sits at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by tall pine trees. Those trees act as a natural fortress, a green barrier separating our sanctuary from the world. No surprise guests here, no neighbors peering through the windows. The air smells of damp earth and cedar. It is a beautiful contrast to the harsh chemical cleaners my mother used to hide her tracks. Healing is not magic. It is a slow reconstruction of your mind. For the first few weeks, I still woke up at night with my heart racing, expecting a knock at the door. I would walk in the living room and check the mantle for hidden cameras. Trauma leaves an echo. But every day, the echo grows fainter. The quiet woods wrapped around us, offering real peace. Without the weight of my mother's judgments, my career flourished. My illustration business didn't just survive, it grew. I signed deals with major publishers, designing covers from a sunlit studio Mark built for me. Overlooking the yard, I proved every word in that fake psych check report wrong. I am not unstable. I am a mother who built a lucrative career using the same intuition that helped me spot a forged seal and save my child. Mark found his rhythm too. He took a teaching job at a rural school nearby. He traded the frantic city energy for a classroom where he can simply teach history. He's done acting like a soldier in some endless shadow war. Now he comes home with chalk on his shirt and a genuine smile. He was our anchor during the worst of it. Seeing him thrive here is a blessing. I'm on the porch, feet pressed into warm cedar. The breeze hums through the pines like water. My tea is finally safe to drink, no poison, no secrets. Across the lawn, Sam not that tiny, I ain't drug newborn anymore. He's a wild 2-year-old in grass, stained denim, his laugh rings out. Bright and clear, he's chasing our new golden retriever, Buster. The dog barks, slowing down just enough so Sam can tackle him, burying his face in that soft golden fur as pure, messy joy. My son does to know about the court battles or the forged papers. He does to know the names of people who tried to steal him. He'll grow up under open skies, love for who he is, not some bargaining chip. That dark, twisted story my sister wrote in her diary. It never happened. We replaced her lies with our reality. The door slides open. Marcus steps out, placing his hands firmly on my shoulders. His touch grounds me. He kisses my temple, and we watch Sam wrestling in the sun. We built this life from nothing, stripping away the toxic weight of our past. If you re trapped by people demanding your compliance for their love, listen. The idea that you owe your family endless forgiveness is just a trap. It's a myth meant to keep victims quiet and everyone else comfortable. Sharing blood is just a biological fluke, not a life sentence. DNA does to give anyone the right to stomp on your boundaries or claim your kids. I spent years confusing guilt with love, thinking I had to swallow my parents' cruelty just to keep the peace. I was wrong. Protecting yourself is selfish the most important thing you ever do. Don't burn your life down just to keep their delusions warm. Real family want to ask you to trade your dignity for a seat at their table. Walking away is terrifying. The silence is loud. And the guilt will try to haunt you. But push through that, and the clarity is worth every bit of it. You will find that your chosen family, your true partners, are stronger than any bloodline. Sometimes, you just have to stop trying to negotiate with monsters. You have to step back, let them trigger their own traps, and just watch. You don't need to light the match, just refuse to be the fuel. You are enough. Your safety is not a request, it's a requirement. So, I have to ask you one final thing.